Your lettuce is dying in the heat, your spinach bolted last week, and you're out here watering twice a day like a full-time job for a plant that gives you 6 weeks of harvest before it quits on you. Here's what nobody in the gardening world wants to admit. The crop you're pouring time and water into is one of the most fragile, high-maintenance plants you could possibly grow. And while you're nursing it through another heat wave, a completely different plant, one that fed entire Bronze Age civilizations, is sitting in near total obscurity. It grows in salt, it laughs at drought, it needs almost no attention. And it is, by almost every nutritional metric, superior to the leafy greens you're killing yourself to keep alive. The name is Orache. And what I'm about to show you in the next 20 minutes will change how you think about your garden forever. Stay until section 5, because that's where the numbers get genuinely shocking. 5,000 years ago, in the river valleys of Central Asia and the Eastern Mediterranean, farmers were growing a plant called Atriplex hortensis. You probably know its common name, Orache, or mountain spinach, or, in some older European traditions, simply garden Orache. This isn't a fringe crop that survived in one obscure corner of the world. Orache appears in records from ancient Persia, from medieval European monastery gardens, from the kitchens of the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, it was one of the most commonly grown leafy vegetables in the entire Old World. Herbalists in the 1500s wrote about it. English cottage gardens grew it as a staple. French cuisine used it as a base green before spinach arrived from Persia and gradually pushed it aside. And then, somewhere in the industrial era of agriculture, it quietly disappeared from mainstream consciousness. Not because it failed, not because it tasted bad, not because it stopped producing. It disappeared because modern agriculture optimized for volume, uniformity, and shelf life, and Orache, with its sprawling growth habit and rapid seed cycle, didn't fit the industrial model. Supermarkets wanted iceberg, they wanted romaine, they wanted leaves that could survive a refrigerated truck for 2 weeks. Orache was too alive for that system. But here's what that system never told you. Orache belongs to the same plant family as quinoa, spinach, and beets, the Chenopodiaceae family, now reclassified as Amaranthaceae. That family has one defining characteristic that sets it apart from almost every other food crop on Earth. It evolved specifically for harsh, marginal environments, salt flats, semi-arid steppes, alkaline soils that would kill your tomatoes overnight. This isn't a plant that tolerates stress, it was engineered by 5,000 years of natural selection to thrive on it. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever heard of Orache before today? I'm genuinely curious how many people watching this already knew it existed. Drop a 1 if yes, a 2 if no. Let's talk about salt, because this is where Orache becomes genuinely extraordinary. Most food crops are glycophytes. They're physiologically damaged by sodium chloride in the soil. When salt concentrations rise, water moves out of root cells through osmosis, essentially causing the plant to dehydrate even when water is physically present. It's called osmotic stress, and it's the reason coastal gardens, desert soils, and heavily irrigated plots gradually become graveyards for conventional crops. Salt accumulation in irrigated farmland is one of the most serious long-term threats to global food production. Agronomists have been warning about it for decades. Orache is a halophyte. That word, halophyte, means it has evolved specific biochemical machinery to not just tolerate salt, but to actively use it. Orache pulls sodium ions into specialized cells called bladder cells on its leaf surface, where the salt is stored and eventually shed. You can literally see this process, and the leaves look like they've been dusted with fine white powder. That's not disease. That's not damage. That's the plant doing exactly what it was designed to do. What this means, practically, is significant. Orache can grow in soils with electrical conductivity levels that would destroy spinach, lettuce, and most brassicas. Experienced growers in coastal regions and arid climates have used it in soils that conventional crops simply cannot survive. In parts of Central Asia where soil salinity has been rising for generations due to irrigation, Orache and its relatives have remained productive when everything else failed. Now, here's the counter-argument I know some of you are already forming. Salt tolerance doesn't matter if I have normal garden soil. Fair point. And here's the honest answer. If you have perfect, well-amended garden soil with no salinity issues, Orache's salt tolerance is a bonus feature, not the headline. The headline for you is everything else. The heat tolerance, the drought resistance, the nutritional profile, and the sheer productivity. The salt story matters most for the growing number of gardeners dealing with degraded soil, hard water accumulation, or coastal exposure, and that number is rising every year. Let's put some real numbers on the table because this is where the conversation shifts from interesting to urgent. Iceberg lettuce, the most commonly purchased salad green in North America, is approximately 96% water. Its nutritional contribution per calorie is so minimal that nutritionists sometimes use it as the textbook example of a food with almost no micronutrient density. You're essentially eating crunchy, mildly flavored water. Romaine is better. Spinach is significantly better. But Orache? Orache is in a different category entirely. Orache leaves contain substantial levels of vitamin A precursors, the red-leafed varieties in particular, where the anthocyanin pigmentation signals high antioxidant content. The protein content per gram of fresh leaf is meaningfully higher than lettuce. The mineral profile includes iron, calcium, and magnesium at levels that reflect its evolutionary history in mineral-rich alkaline soils. Traditional herbalists across Europe and Asia used Orache specifically as a strengthening food, not a medicine, but a functional food with real physiological weight. The seeds are where the story gets even more interesting. Orache seeds are edible and nutritious in a way that closely parallels quinoa, its botanical cousin. They can be ground into flour, cooked as a porridge grain, or used as a thickener. This is not a salad plant that happens to have seeds. It's a dual-purpose crop, leaf, vegetable, and grain source from the same plant in the same growing season. Medieval European records, particularly from monastery agricultural traditions, document Orache being used both ways simultaneously. The leaves fed the household through summer. The seeds were harvested in autumn and ground for bread flour through winter. One plant, two harvests, zero waste. Now here's the thing I want you to sit with. We live in an era where quinoa is sold at a premium in every health food store, where people pay top dollar for ancient grains and heritage superfoods. Orache is essentially quinoa's older, leafier, more productive sibling, and it's growing in near total obscurity. If that doesn't make you want to plant some seeds this season, I don't know what will. If this is landing the way I think it is, hit that like button. It tells me this kind of deep, historical plant science is what you want more of. And honestly, what I'm about to show you in the next section makes everything so far look like the warm-up. Here is where Orache becomes genuinely subversive as a garden crop. It germinates in cold soil, down to around 5 degrees Celsius, which means you can direct sow it weeks before your last frost date while you're still waiting to even think about tomatoes. Once established, it grows with an aggression that borders on alarming. Under good conditions, Orache can reach 2 meters in height. In poor conditions, dry, salty, nutrient-depleted soil, it still reaches 1.5 meters and produces prolifically. It does not need fertilizing in the way that heavy-feeding crops like corn or brassicas do. It does not need regular watering once established. It does not need staking, trellising, or any structural support. It self-seeds prolifically, which means once you establish it in a garden, it will return year after year without replanting. Experienced growers describe it as the opposite of high maintenance. The less you do, the more it seems to produce. Heat tolerance is exceptional. While spinach bolts, sends up a seed stalk and becomes bitter and inedible. At temperatures above roughly 24 degrees Celsius, Orache continues producing harvestable leaves through genuine summer heat. The bolting process in Orache is slower, more gradual, and the leaves remain palatable for a longer window. This is not a minor advantage. For gardeners in USDA Zone 7 and above, it means the difference between a 6-week harvest window and a 14-week one. The growth habit is upright and architectural. The red-leafed varieties in particular are genuinely beautiful, with deep magenta leaves that look ornamental. This is a plant that can do double duty as a productive food crop and a structural element in a garden design. Several heritage seed catalogs have sold it under the name Red Mountain Spinach, specifically because the visual appeal is part of the draw. Here's the honest caveat. Orache is a prolific self-seeder, and if you're not managing it, it can spread beyond where you intended. This isn't a disaster. It's actually a feature in a food forest or permaculture context, but in a tidy kitchen garden, you'll want to harvest or remove the seed heads before they fully mature if you want to control its footprint. Experienced growers treat it like a managed volunteer, welcome, productive, but worth a little attention at seed set time. Let's put Orache's track record in perspective, because this is the part where the numbers get genuinely shocking. Quinoa gets marketed as a 5,000-year-old Andean superfood, and that's accurate. But Orache has an equally ancient cultivation history on the opposite side of the world, in the Old World agricultural traditions that directly gave rise to European and Middle Eastern food culture. Archaeobotanical evidence, the study of plant remains from archaeological sites, has found Atriplex seeds in Neolithic settlements across Central Asia and the Near East. This plant was being deliberately cultivated before the Egyptian pyramids were built. In medieval Europe, Orache appears consistently in the herbals, the botanical encyclopedias that served as both agricultural and medical references. John Gerard's Herbal of 1597 describes it in detail. John Parkinson's Paradisi in Sole Paradisus Terrestris of 1629, one of the most important English gardening texts ever written, lists Orache as a standard kitchen garden plant. These weren't fringe references. These were the authoritative gardening texts of their era, written for serious growers, and Orache was in them as a matter of course. The Ottoman Empire grew it. Persian cuisine used it. Scandinavian traditional cooking incorporated it. North African agricultural traditions had their own Atriplex species serving similar roles. This is a plant with a global footprint in traditional agriculture, not one culture's local secret, but a near universal solution to the problem of growing nutritious food in difficult conditions. And then the 20th century happened. Hybrid varieties of spinach bred for commercial production, refrigerated transport that made iceberg lettuce viable as a mass commodity, industrial agriculture that standardized the supermarket vegetable aisle into about 40 species out of the roughly 300 that traditional European gardens once grew. Orache didn't fail the test of history. It was simply left behind by a system that valued shelf life over nutrition, uniformity over resilience, and profit margins over 5,000 years of proven performance. The question isn't whether Orache works. 5 millennia of farmers already answered that. The question is why we stopped listening to them. If what we've covered so far, the salt science, the civilizational track record, the nutritional profile, if any of that has shifted how you see your garden, then subscribe right here. We go this deep every single week on crops and growing systems that the mainstream gardening world has forgotten or never knew. And what's coming in the next 3 sections? That's where we get into the practical side, how to grow it, how to eat it, and how to use it to transform the marginal, difficult spots in your garden that nothing else will touch. That's the part that actually changes your garden this season. Let's get concrete, because information without application is just entertainment. Orache is direct sown. You do not need to start it indoors. In fact, it prefers direct sowing because it develops a taproot quickly that doesn't transplant well. Sow seeds shallowly, no more than half a centimeter deep, in early spring as soon as the soil can be worked. Germination is typically fast, 5 to 10 days in cool soil, even faster as temperatures rise. Thin to about 30 centimeters between plants. If you're growing for leaf harvest rather than seeds, you can go tighter. 20 centimeters, because you'll be harvesting outer leaves continuously, and the plants won't reach their full architectural size. Soil requirements are genuinely minimal. Orache will perform in poor, sandy, alkaline, or saline soils where most vegetables struggle. It prefers well-drained conditions but tolerates clay better than many crops. If you have a garden bed that's been disappointing, where things just don't thrive and you're not sure why, Orache is one of the first crops worth trying there. It's not a cure for terrible soil, but it's one of the few vegetables that will actually produce in conditions that defeat conventional crops. Watering. Establish seedlings with regular moisture for the first 2 to 3 weeks. After that, established plants are remarkably drought-tolerant. In trials and in the experience of heritage seed growers, established Orache can go weeks without irrigation in summer and continue producing. This is not a recommendation to ignore it entirely. Consistent moisture does improve yield and leaf quality, but the point is that it will not collapse in a dry spell the way lettuce or spinach will. Harvest young leaves from the growing tips, the top 10 to 15 centimeters of new growth. These are the most tender and have the best flavor. The larger, older leaves lower on the plant are edible but have a more pronounced mineral taste that some people love and others find strong. As with most leafy greens, the more frequently you harvest the tips, the more the plant bushes out and produces lateral growth. For seed harvest, allow some plants to go to full maturity. The seed heads are large and dramatic, almost architectural in their own right. Harvest when the seeds are dry and papery. Thresh them by hand or against a bucket and store in a cool, dry place. They remain viable for 3 to 4 years under good storage conditions. One practical note, Orache produces oxalic acid, as do spinach, beets, and chard. This is not a reason to avoid it. The levels are similar to spinach, but it is a reason not to eat it as your sole green every single day. Rotate it with other greens, cook it lightly to reduce oxalate content, and if you have a history of kidney stones, consult your doctor before making it a daily staple. This is the same advice any responsible grower would give about spinach, and Orache deserves the same honest framing. Now let's talk about the part that actually determines whether any of this matters in your kitchen. Orache tastes good. This is not a survival food that you eat because it's nutritious and resilient. It's a genuinely pleasant vegetable with a flavor profile that sits somewhere between spinach and mild chard. Earthy, slightly mineral, with the red-leafed varieties having a subtle sweetness that the green varieties lack. Young leaves eaten raw in salads have a tender texture and a mild, pleasant flavor. Cooked, they wilt quickly like spinach and develop a deeper, more savory character. The traditional culinary uses span the entire Old World range of its cultivation. In Persian cooking, leafy greens cooked with aromatics and served alongside rice or flatbread, a category of dish called Orache or Barani, have used Orache interchangeably with spinach for centuries. In medieval European cooking, it appeared in potages, the thick vegetable soups that formed the daily diet of most people, and in stuffed pastries. The Ottoman kitchen used it in burek-style preparations layered with cheese and baked in thin pastry. Modernly, it works anywhere you'd use spinach or chard. Sauté it with olive oil and garlic. Wilt it into pasta. Add it to frittatas or egg dishes. Layer it into savory tarts. Blend young leaves into green smoothies where the flavor is mild enough to disappear behind fruit. The red-leafed varieties add dramatic visual color to salads that no amount of romaine can match. The seed flour application is worth taking seriously. Ground Orache seeds produce a flour with a nutritional profile similar to quinoa flour, higher in protein than wheat flour, with a different amino acid balance that complements grain-based diets. Traditional use involved mixing it with other flours rather than using it alone, which is still the practical approach. It produces a dense, slightly nutty bread when used at around 20 to 30% substitution in a standard recipe. Heritage food researchers and traditional skills practitioners who have worked with it describe the flavor as pleasantly earthy and the texture as satisfying. This is a plant that works at every level of the kitchen. Salad green, cooked vegetable. Grain substitute, and it comes from one plant in one growing season with minimal input. Be honest with yourself right now. How many of the vegetables currently in your garden can say that? Tell me in the comments. What's the one crop in your garden you'd replace first if you found something better? Here's the uncomfortable truth that Orache forces us to confront. Modern gardening culture, and modern food culture more broadly, has narrowed its focus to an almost absurd degree. Of the approximately 30,000 species of edible plants on Earth, global agriculture now depends on roughly 150 species for the vast majority of its production. And of those 150, just 9 crops account for more than half of all human caloric intake worldwide. 9. We have taken the extraordinary biodiversity of the plant kingdom and funneled it into a pipeline so narrow that a single pathogen, like the one that devastated the Gros Michel banana in the 1950s, can threaten entire food systems. We have traded resilience for efficiency. And the crops we lost in that trade, crops like Orache, like skirret, like Good King Henry, like dozens of other heritage vegetables that fed Europe for centuries, were often the most resilient ones. Orache is not just an interesting historical footnote. It's a data point in a much larger argument about how we think about food security. Climate change is increasing soil salinity in irrigated agricultural regions worldwide. Drought frequency is rising across major growing regions. Water costs are increasing in ways that make the twice-daily irrigation demands of conventional salad crops economically unsustainable for small growers. In that context, a crop that tolerates salt, survives drought, produces prolifically in poor soil, and has a 5,000-year track record of feeding people isn't a curiosity. It's exactly what resilient food systems need. The heritage seed movement, the network of small seed companies, seed libraries, and individual growers who have been preserving these forgotten varieties, has been making this argument for decades. Organizations like the Seed Savers Exchange in the United States and the Heritage Seed Library in the United Kingdom have maintained Orache varieties, precisely because they understand that agricultural biodiversity is not a luxury, it's insurance. And here's what I want to leave you with. You don't need to replace your entire garden. You don't need to become a heritage seed evangelist overnight. You need to plant one packet of Orache seeds in the worst corner of your garden. The dry corner, the salty corner, the corner where nothing else thrives, and watch what happens. That's the experiment. 5,000 years of farmers already know the result. Now it's your turn. If you know someone who's been struggling with a difficult garden space, a poor soil, coastal exposure, summer heat that kills everything, send them this video. This is exactly the kind of thing I wish someone had shown me years ago. And if you've made it this far, you're clearly not someone who settles for surface-level gardening content. That like button is right there. Hit it so the algorithm shows this to the people who need it most. We're almost at the close, and if you've made it this far through 20 minutes of deep agricultural history and plant science, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Subscribe, because this is what we do every single week. Not surface-level, top 10 plants. Content, real depth, real history, real science. The crops and growing systems that the mainstream gardening world forgot, and why getting them back into your garden matters more now than at any point in the last century. We started this video with a simple provocation. Your lettuce is fragile, high maintenance, and nutritionally mediocre. And what I hope you're leaving with isn't just the name of a new plant, it's a different way of seeing your garden entirely. The most resilient food crops in history weren't the ones that needed the most attention. They were the ones that needed the least. They were the ones that evolved in hard places, that carried 5,000 years of selection pressure for survival, that fed civilizations not because someone marketed them brilliantly, but because they simply worked. Orache worked. It still works, and it's waiting for you to give it a corner of your garden to prove it. One last thing before you go, I want to know. Are you going to plant Orache this season? Drop a yes or a no in the comments right now. I read every single one, and your answers genuinely shape what we cover next. Thank you for watching all the way through. There are other videos right here on the end screen that go just as deep on forgotten crops and ancient growing systems. Pick whichever one calls to you. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for being here. The videos on the end screen right now go even deeper into this world of forgotten crops and resilient growing systems. Pick one that grabs you. And if Orache is going in your garden this year, drop it in the comments. I want to hear about it. Video description. The 5,000-year-old salt-tolerant supergrain that outperforms lettuce in every measurable way, and why modern gardeners have never heard of it. Orache, Atriplex hortensis, has fed civilizations from ancient Persia to medieval Europe for over 5 millennia. It tolerates salt, survives drought, thrives in poor soil, and produces nutritious leaves and edible seeds from a single plant in a single season. While modern gardening culture obsesses over fragile, high-maintenance salad greens, this forgotten crop has been quietly waiting to be rediscovered. In this video, we cover the full story. The botanical science behind Orache's extraordinary salt tolerance, its nutritional profile compared to modern salad greens, its documented 5,000-year cultivation history across the Old World, a complete, practical growing guide, culinary uses from raw salads to seed flour, and why crops like this matter more now than ever for resilient home food production. Whether you're dealing with difficult soil, summer heat that kills your spinach, or simply looking for a more productive and nutritious alternative to conventional salad greens, Orache deserves a place in your garden. Hashtag Orache growing, hashtag forgotten crops, hashtag heirloom vegetables, hashtag resilience, gardening, hashtag ancient grains, hashtag heritage, seeds, hashtag salt-tolerant plants, hashtag food forest, hashtag garden science, hashtag soil and centuries.